In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. You know, it's a very interesting thing. You know, the other day I was talking to a parishioner. We were talking about animals, and we were talking about rabbits and how to get rid of the rabbits in your backyard and chipmunks that dig underneath things. And as I was reading the gospel reading, I happened to think about a different animal that is called the Jesus lizard. And it's called the Jesus lizard. It's a gecko, actually. And a gecko is an animal, if you want to call it that, or amphibian. I'm not quite sure what category it falls into. But it runs, and it will run over the top of water to get a bug that could be sitting on a rock. And it runs extraordinarily fast. Now, you might think, well, how does it do that? I mean, it's obviously there's math involved in the viscosity of water and the table of water. That's why when you put your hand on it slow, it goes in easy. But if you slap water, it smacks your hand. There's something about the surface of water itself that's a whole other conversation. However, but how does the gecko do this? Well, one of the ways it does it is it does something similar to a bicycle ride. It pushes out. And it pushes and it rocks its weight back and forth as it pushes out. But it does something interesting with its hands. And what it does, or whatever you want to call those things that are on the front of it, it groups it together and creates a bubble. So it's actually pushing air. So it's creating these little inflators underneath its feet. So there's air pockets, and it's pushing these air pockets, and it's actually stepping on the air pockets as if they were life rafts on there. But one of the interesting things is no matter what the mechanics is that makes a gecko run, whether it's the shape of the legs, whether it's the pattern in which they run, or the ability to cup air and push it down and step on it, if it stops, it sinks, no matter what. That's why they move so quickly. And most of the video that you would ever find of a gecko running on water is shown in slow motion. Because just to see it, because it scoots across the water so fast, and that's how it's able to actually catch the insects and eat them, is it runs past and then sticks out this gigantic tongue that lashes onto its prey and then will stop and actually sometimes grab onto whatever that animal or the bug or whatever was hanging onto, or they stop and they swim with the prey in their mouth. But the key is, they sink when they stop. This animal that has no understanding of theology, is not an orthogecko or anything like that, right? It's just this creature that's able to do this to go across the water. Well, we're not like that. We're not geckos, at least as far as last time I checked, no one has webbed feet. We are people who are many times tormented between our heart and our mind. And that's really the battle that we see that St. Peter has on this day, where Christ comes to them in the fourth watch of the night, which means it's really, really early in the morning. So probably around 3 in the morning. Christ comes, and there's waves, and it's dark. It's dark at 3 in the morning, unless you're in Alaska at a certain time of year. It's dark. They see the waves, and they hear Christ coming to them on the water in the midst of the waves. Now, we know that the disciples were even though they were fishermen, they were in some doozy storms with Christ. And one of those you might recall where Christ was sleeping and the waves are going. They're like, don't you care that we're going to die out here? And he's sleeping on the boat. And he wakes up and he calms the winds down. And they say, how did he do this? Well, you have St. Peter who hears Christ. But a very interesting footnote here is if the Greek says E-C-E, which means, if you are him, call me to you on the water. So you might say, well, how does St. Peter say, if it is you, call me on the water? Well, let me give you a little background here. This isn't about doubt as much as it is age, I feel. We have St. Peter who, when Christ resurrects from the dead and he's on the shore, and he says, hey, do you catch any fish? And then St. John says, it's the Lord. What does St. Peter do? He jumps in the water. He doesn't even know. He can't see him that far. And we have St. Peter, when they hear that Christ is risen from the tomb, John goes with him. They run to the tomb, and what does St. John say? I outran Peter to the tomb, right? Because he's probably like, just going, holy cow, we just ran all this way. I can't do this. I'm older, right? St. Peter is right there in the icon. He's the one on the left, the two holding the church. St. Paul's on the right. St. Peter does not have dark hair. He does not have a short beard. His beard is gray as well, to show that he had some age to him. Now, as a person who wrestles with eyes lately, and seeing, it's interesting, as the older you get, the longer you wish your arm was. Think about St. Peter now being a little bit older, really did he have contact lenses? Did they have LASIK back then? Did they have eyeglasses for people? Or did they have just maybe glass or something that they would hold, or just have somebody else read for them? And that's one of the things, too, when we say the readers in the church, the altar boys put their belts on, it was, could you read, number one? Did you understand the text? But could you see all the details in the Hebrew text? Could you see the iotas and the dots that we hear about? When we say not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law, well, you had to know the difference between an iota and a dot when you would read. Otherwise, you were considered not a reader. Anyways, come to the point of Christ coming to him on the water. It's dark. It's 3 a.m. He's older. The waves are going. It's kind of stormy. And he says, if it's you, call me to you on the water. Not, if it's you, call me on the water. It's, is that you? I can't really tell. Pitch black. They didn't have their LED flashlights. They didn't have, spotlights on the boat. It was candles, right? Candles to see what you were doing, or the moon, right? That's why they call it the harvest moon, right? The longer moons, so that you could stay out later and harvest your crops. Those types of things. So he says, if it's you, can you call me to you on the water? And he says, come. In Greek, kelefson, which is, he commands him to come. Now, kelefson is another word that has infiltrated the liturgical cycle of the church as well. When we have the Vespers, and before they chant, they say to the bishop, kelefson despota, which means command master, the tone in which the evening is going to be sung. And that command to Peter is, come to me on the water. Peter gets out. He doesn't say he thought about it or he sat there. He wondered if he was going to sing. He gets out and starts walking across the water. Then what happens? The waves come, the wind blows, and his mind takes over. His heart was calling out to Christ to save him the first time. Call me to you. Let me come to you on the water. The heart that believed, the preeminent apostle who says, I am going to follow you all the way to my death, which he does. But then his mind gets involved and it starts playing games with him. And he says, the wind's blowing, it's a little, what am I doing? And then he sinks. Then what does he say? Lord, save me. A man, now, a grown man, who is a fisherman by trait, falls in the water. Do you think that he knew how to swim? He did know how to swim, right? Could he swim far? Yeah, he did. Because the proof of this is in the story I just told you earlier, when he sees Christ, or he can't see Christ, he's far enough away, and they said about 100 furlongs, which, I don't know what the math exactly would be, but it's a distance. It's a good ways off. But far enough where they could hear him, but still a distance. But he jumps in and he swims all the way. He's not an incapable swimmer. He gets out, he goes to Christ, and he starts sinking in the water, and he says, Lord, save me. As if he can't even swim at that point. He can't stay afloat. He took his mind and put it above his heart and lost focus of what he was doing. And the beautiful icon that, at some point I'd like to get for the church is, it's Christ, and he's standing in the water, and St. Peter is up to his neck in the water, and he's reaching up. and Christ is bending down to pick him up out of the water. And it says, Kyrie soson me, which means, Lord, save me, which is what St. Peter said, Lord, save me. And then he picks him up out of the water and says, oh man, why such little faith, right? Man, not Peter, man. The humanity of the mind. Because the heart is really how we express ourselves. But when we start thinking of the mind, then we become base creatures, right? Even when St. Peter says to Christ at one point, you will never go to your death. I won't allow it. And what does Christ say to him? What's he call? Whose name? Anybody? Satan. He says, Satan, ipage opiso mu satana. Get behind me, Satan. In other words, get away. That is not you talking. That's the temptation to say that I am not going to fulfill the will of the Father. Get away. He doesn't call him Peter. He says Satan at that point. That doesn't mean that Peter was Satan, but it means that temptation was coming through, and he calls it for what it is. Are we bringing the devil through things we're doing? Are we bringing just the mind through and saying that everything should be rational and should be explained by science? In fact, I was with someone the other night, a parishioner, and we were talking, and they were saying, how do you know? I mean, there's always that question, and I think we all think that. How do you know that, Noah's, the movie Noah that came out now, and were there really these rock creatures? No, there wasn't rock creatures, okay? So if you saw that movie, that's a whole nother, how do you say it? Hollywood garbage, if you want to call it that, at best. But one of the things was, how do you explain these things? How does science look at the fact that there's no dinosaurs in the Bible? And one of the things, it's not a historical book. It's a book on salvation, but it's not a history book, right? Just because you read a book on American history doesn't mean that nothing else was going on in the world at that same time. It's just focused on this particular facet. And the Bible is focused on our salvation. So when we look at the ideas of humanity saying, well, we have to explain this. We have to have a reason for it. Otherwise, I don't understand it. Then we take out the miraculous nature of God. We take out the fact that just you being here is a miracle. And if you don't think it's a miracle, and you think it's just strictly science, then there's something wrong. And if you think it's random, that's something wrong too. But you, being behind your eyes, is unique. I will never be behind your eyes. You will never be behind my eyes, because you are unique and created by God to be put into this shell that was developed by your parents. But the point is, we look at miracles, and if we look at them with our heart, they make absolute sense. They make perfect, clear sense that we see the miracle and we say, God has interceded in my life and has changed everything. But once we put our mind in it, we can say, did he really do that? Or is it just, I don't know. Is it just random? Was it because of medication? Was it because of, my body is a good recovery, good at recoveries? Or is it that, I'm so intelligent, obviously I had to do better in life because I'm so this or that or whatever, and it has nothing to do with God saying, go this way, go that way. And his gentle hand just leading us and pointing us in the direction, and then he stops and says, can you do it? Can you do it? Okay, go. That's what he did to Peter. He said, come on. It's like when anyone who has a child, the first steps, come on. And you say, and you're making all these weird faces and all this, and blah, 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 and making all weird noises and all those types of things, and you're coaxing your child to come to you to move. And then what happens? Sometimes they stop and they look around, and they always have that inebriated walk when they start, and boom, they flop over or whatever. But if they're focused on you, sometimes they're just looking at you and they're coming. It's the same thing with Christ. We come to Christ with our heart. But once we get the mind involved, it becomes a problem. And if our mind is not tied into our heart, then we get lost and we stop. And even the gecko, which can run across water all day long, if he stops, is going to sink. And likewise with our life in the church, God calls us to do extraordinary things. And you might say, well, what's so extraordinary about things in my life? You don't even know what is unseen that God is doing for you or for me until the end of our life when he says, look at all these things I did for you. We only count the negatives, right? We only say, well, this isn't working, this is bad, I don't like this or I don't like that. But what about all the positives that we just completely overlook? Completely I take it for granted that those things are going to happen. What are the things that God has done for us that we can't see that make us who we are? And if you think, well, what is this ethereal thing I'm talking about? Think of what you're breathing in right now. You're breathing in oxygen that is completely invisible, that is keeping you alive. Is that something that is a gift for us? Yeah. Go try that on the moon. Go try that on Mars. Go try that on Jupiter. It's not going to work. This is where the gift is. The gift of life, the gift of creation, this is where it is. But just because it's invisible doesn't mean it's not good for us. And just because it's invisible doesn't mean it's bad for us. I had, through the years, there's been tragedies that I've had to respond to. And one of them was someone had a car and they were in their garage and they left it on. And they died because they left their car on in the garage. Why? Because they ingested something that was invisible. They breathed in something that was poison. So when we think about St. Peter today, and we think about Christ walking on the water, which is one of those things that pretty much everybody can remember the story of Christ walking on the water and St. Peter going out and sinking, is he calls us all to him. He says, come on. Whether you see me clearly or whether you just hear my voice at a distance, whatever it is, if you know God full out or if you just know a little bit about what he's saying, he calls us and says, come. Kelefson, come on. Come to me, and if you go to him, you can't stop. Otherwise you'll sink, and you cannot take your eye off Christ or decide that your mind is saying that what I'm doing is just, it's too much. It can't be done. And then we sink. And then God says, okay, you think it's all you? There you go. I'll take it away. And he did. Because who was the source of the miracle of Peter walking on the water? Was it Peter? No. It was Christ saying, you can do this now. And he tells us all in our own unique ways that we can do things. But we have to trust in him. We have to have our heart forward. And don't worry about the mind. Don't worry about what's rational. Because the rational mind leads to destruction, and the heart of faith leads to salvation. Amen.